In Book 6 of the Iliad, the Trojan hero Glaucus ends up exchanging gold armor for what he thought was gold armor of equal value, but it turned out to be bronze. Hence the name Glaucus means to be both bright and glimmering, in addition to bluish green. So the blue-green is like the tint of oxidized copper. And like we understand this. Even it appears as the color of our money today, right? This Glaucus is the bluish-green color of the dollar bill. The same analysis of Glaucus can be applied to many myths and civilizations. Some examples are in Greece, like the myth of Hermes stealing the cattle of Apollo in the Homeric hymns. In Hebrew, we know of Joseph and his younger brother Benjamin in the book of Genesis. In the Odyssey, you have Telemachus and his father Odysseus. And furthermore, we have the Sumerian poem titled Debate Between Silver and Copper. And it's from the Sumerian poem that I think one most clearly arrives at the point, or one of the main points of these types of myths. And that's it being, it's a scam. The metals exchange is a scam. It's much like Glaucus and Diomedes. It's this bronze that's sold as gold. In this case, instead of Glaucus, there's the word Chalkos or Chalkos from the Greek word Chalkos for copper, describing the reddish tint of copper. And we all know or associate, this color, the reddish orange rusty color, with copper piping, right? And when we think of copper, we think of Chalkos first, and then we also think of Glaucus. And then the Chalkos, I argue, we can equate with this Chelon or Telon, Kalon, or Shellos. In English, we probably would recognize it more as like shell, the shell of a tortoise. But in Greek, it's Chelon or Shellos, Kalon. That is said, and it's the tortoise shell that is said to be strung into a lyre, in which Hermes trades Apollo in order for Hermes to become the god of shepherds, right? So Apollo was the god of shepherds, and then he trades that attribute or that responsibility to Hermes for the lyre that was strung from the tortoiseshell. And this is seen as a restitution, right? So Apollo has his cattle stolen, and Hermes has to make it up to him. So he trades him the lyre. In addition, Apollo also gives Mercury or Hermes the caduceus, so this golden wand. And once again, that golden wand carries the attributes, or it's like a seal or the responsibility of a shepherd, right? The shepherd's, the caducean wand, the golden wand. In that sense, it's much like Diomed and Glaucus, where there's a trading of bronze for the golden armor. Although I argue Diomed or Diomedes is analogous to Hur, or he's of the tribe of Judah, whereas Odysseus I equate to Joshua, so he's from the tribe of Joseph. And then going further, we can say Telemachus is from the tribe of Benjamin, right? He's like Benjamin. Furthermore, I identify Odysseus as this Chalkos or copper, where we can think of Chalkos as like a shekel or a shilling or a penny, an equivalent of silver, the legal tender, where like I would say silver is more analogous to Telemachus or Apollo in his tussle with Hermes. So like Hermes is copper and Apollo is silver. Silver is the money, right? And the way we think of bills and houses, boats, stocks, and in numbers in an account, right? To have money is just we equate silver like to say you have money, right? Is like almost like a brag, right? Or a flex or a symbol or status, like silver. Cash is the Chalkos, right? It's noisy. It rattles around in your pockets every day. It's dirty. It's clunky coins and bills that you like plop down on the convenience store counter, right? They're equivalent. Silver and copper are equivalent. They're just different. And I think that's somewhat of the theme going on in the poem, Silver and Copper, but also Apollo and Hermes, Odysseus and Telemachus. If you look at the seal of the Federal Reserve of the USA, it's an eagle or Zeus holding on to arrows, or Apollo the archer, the far shooter, along with the olive branch of Hermes. It signifies the deal between Hermes and Apollo, right? And the ceding of the Federal Reserve or royal mint to these private markets, to the Mercurial. I see it as a blueprint, though, for like nepotistic merchants to control commerce, right? To pry away the federal mint from being controlled by the royal palace or in control of the priesthood, the oracle of Apollo, or better yet, maybe some more archaic form of the sun god, like Shamash, Ra, or Utu. Apollo in Greek means to wash, or I'd imagine it's like this untarnished or polished silver. It's a debt paid as in restitution after a court case. That we associate Utu or Shamash, this god of justice, right? So it's to wash the record clean. It's a clean slate, as in Apollo is the god of truth in matters of justice, i.e. like property, tax, personal dispute. He judges, or he knows the truth. He sees everything. This is the more archaic form of the sun god again, like in civilizations like Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, and perhaps we can say the same for Greece. From Apollo, we get apology, or this form of restitution. From Apollo, we get apology and this restitution. So Apollo is this god of civilization, or he's upholding the morality, upholding the law, able to apologize, able to uphold justice and this law of morality, to be able to give and to take, right? And then whereas Hermes is a liar, he's like Joseph, where Joseph means to increase or to double, right? He doubles down. He's never going to tell the truth. He's always going to have his pride or his personal gain over the morality, over the law, over the kingdom, over the whole, right? The law is the whole, is the collective. Telemachus, I argue, means testament, or it's like literally tortoiseshell machine. He's this Shelomachus, the lyre that Hermes strings up, or the bow that Odysseus strings at the end of the Odyssey. It's a market to exchange silver, copper, and cattle or livestock, right? Basically, the royal tender, the Apollonian, the washed or polished silver is traded for the Chalkos, the silver that turns out to be bronze or a tortoiseshell. That's why I say it's like Glaucus and Diomedes, but it's just different metals and different exchange rates, right? So Telemachus is the far-shooting Apollo. Both are understood as on a higher plane than the copper. For one, Apollo is said to have built his temple upon Mount Parnassus, right? And the term that's used is up on, right? And his floors are made of stone. And to reach the oracle Apollo, you have to climb up over the stones. You have to go up the mountain, and you have to go up the high road, this rocky road, right? And the key direction is up. So from the Homeric hymn to Apollo, when he said this, Phoebus Apollo laid out all the foundations throughout, wide and very long, and upon, and again, the key word here is upon. So here, let me read again. And upon these, the sons of Erginus, Trophonius, and Agamedes, dear to the deathless gods, laid a footing of stone, and the countless tribes of men built the whole temple of wrought stones to be sung forever. Telemachus, I imagine, is like this pirated type of silver. He's like, he's a fake form. He's like the far-shooting Apollo, right? He's the far-working god, a man-made sun. He's like the hippie Jesus with a guitar. He's Benjamin the ravening wolf. He's far off. He has to reach up and cross the stone threshold, it says in the Odyssey. He has to go up the road to consult the oracle of Apollo, right? To step over his stone floors, to become the Apollonian, to be part of the trade for silver and Chalkos, the tortoiseshell of Hermes. The phrase we see in the Odyssey and the Homeric hymn to Hermes to describe the phenomena of rising up is Hooper Banyo Lainos Odon or Wodon. And maybe it's like Hooper, or better yet, Uber Lainos Odon or Wodon. And I've never actually read any of these philosophers. I read Plato like in college, but after that I just never went back to it. I've always kind of read the myths. Always was more interested in the myths. And I think this is probably what the philosopher Nietzsche means, like this Uberman, this overman, to surmount, to come up, to rise up and surmount, right? So altogether, if you combine these three terms, you get roughly to step over, climb, or surmount the stone threshold, right? It's this threshold means road or way. So it's like to take the high mountain road or to take the high rocky pass. It's this Uber Lion Lanos Wodon or Odon. In the Homeric hymn to Hermes, Hermes wishes to steal the cattle of Apollo, or he springs up and surmounts the rocky threshold of his cave. He's like, I say, Joseph, the vine growing by the spring, growing over the wall. He's going up. Hermes stealing Apollo's cattle is the same kind of as like Odysseus and Telemachus. It's much the same as Jacob blessing Benjamin in Genesis 49, again, where Jacob says Joseph is the vine climbing over the wall. Again, climbing up is the key point. Joseph as a vine climbing over the wall can be seen as coming to consult the oracle of Apollo, or a way to kind of become the oracle or steal away from him or fool him. Furthermore, I argue we can fool him or become like maybe like this pirated version of him, right? To kind of like try to replicate him. Furthermore, I argue we can think of the word Odon or Wodon or threshold, way, road as Odin, right? The Norse god, equivalent to the Roman Mercury and the Greek Hermes. So literally the way, and likewise we can think of Odysseus as like Odin, right? Because Odysseus is like Hermes. They're related. And Odysseus we get from Odine or Wodine, to suffer. There you can say we could probably arrive at Odin as well, right? I mean, Odin is O-D-I, and then Odysseus O-D-Y, right? I mean, they're not too far off. And then Leon is the cave or rocky threshold that Hermes emerges from in order to steal Apollo's cattle. So all three together is like Telemachus is the Uber, or the Uberbaino, the Uberman, and Odon or Wodon, the way or the road, is like Odysseus, and Leonon is the cave, or he's like Laertes. So combining them, perhaps we have like the funny joke of the leprechaun, right? He's like looking for their lucky charms. He's going up the high mountain way to like find some silver or copper. Additionally, Hermes in the Homeric hymns is described as Ariones, or the luck bringer. So from Ariones, or the luck bringer, I'd say we get the name Ireland, or the land of luck, or lucky charms. And putting these three words together in maybe a different order, you have Leinon, Uber, Odon, or something like a rocky way up or a rocky path up. And I think from here you probably get leprechaun. And furthermore, to drive the point home, in the Odyssey, Homer says that Agamemnon, who sought the oracle of Phoebus Apollo, crossed the stone threshold, right? To see Apollo, you have to climb up the stone. And Telemachus in book 16 and book 17, he crosses the stone threshold. Telemachus, the young prince, strives to be kind of this Apollonian, right? He has to rise up, consult the oracle of Apollo. In that regard, perhaps that aspect, he's like his father of Odysseus or Hermes. He wants to rise up and replicate the Apollonian, right? And in turn, obtain some of his attributes and responsibilities. Like Hermes steals Apollo's cattle and he becomes the shepherd. I say he's pirated because he's not quite pure silver. Telemachus is a mix of silver and copper. He's an alloy, or he just represents an impurity in general, whereas Apollo is to wash or to purify, untarnish, a polished pure silver. Maybe the pirating of coins was good enough that it could be considered Apollonian, right, this Chalkos. Thus, Apollo trades his cattle for the tortoiseshell lyre, or Chalkos. Could also be that the new minting of alloys allowed these who controlled copper to get a foothold in the silver industry, or the royal treasuries, right, to rise up over the wall, so to speak. This kind of place of in the mint, or controlling the Federal Reserve, or being in the Greek or in the Roman times, they had patricians, right? You couldn't do certain things unless you were a patrician, right? And that's kind of like an enclosure or a wall around something as a barrier to inclusion. So maybe that was spot that was reserved for Apollo or analogous sun gods, right? In the Bronze Age, this Federal Reserve was controlled by by Shamash, or the sun god, the god of justice, or he saw everything as the truth, right? This would lead credence to my theory that Telemachus means roughly testament, or he's testudo mint, or he's copper mint, he's like he's like a shekel making machine. Telemachus, I see, is like a copper mint or shekel making machine. It's also, yes, like this guitar, right? That you can say that a guitar is like a shekel making machine, but I think in general it also can literally mean like this archaic or ancient contraption that was like using like tension and stuff from strings and stuff could be turned into a mint or a press or a machine to mint copper or silver and copper coins, because copper alloys are used for minting coins today, and i.e. like a shekel or silver. And then today we have sterling silver is 92.5% silver, 7.5% copper, and then coin silver is like 90% silver, 10% copper. It's important to remember the poem in life itself is dynamic, right? We can rewrite the myths and strive to be Apollonian and to be the ones on top. But for that we have to rise up ourselves and consult the oracle. Or maybe better yet, there is no rising up. You either are pure or not, right? To rise up would necessitate to doing through means of like thieving and pirating, like Odysseus and Telemachus, this copper and silver, the blend of it, the tortoiseshell, the full silver, the Chalkos. They're thieves. Even if Telemachus is silver and that he has it in it and he's an alloy, he is somewhat impure, and like his father, Odysseus or Hermes, he's got a bit of copper in him. We can think of the wolf Benjamin kind of in the same way, or maybe even this kind of far-shooting Apollo has to come down, right, and confront Hermes. Apollo shouldn't have to be coming down. He should be always up, right? But at the end, and maybe that's like just with context, that just tells you kind of the dignified position of Apollo, that he's up, right? And then Odysseus or Hermes are kind of this tarnished kind of metal is in the ground, right, in the caves, and he has to come up. Benjamin in Hebrew means son of Yamin or Hamin or Jamin. So it's, well, Ben means vine, so it's vine of Yamin. So I'd argue if we think of it in the more phonetic Spanish, it makes more sense, where you have Benjamin is Ben Hymin or son of Hymin. And Hymin in the Auric traditions, I say we can associate with a priest or even Odysseus. I've argued that Hymen is Odysseus in according to Orpheus. Perhaps Hymen or Yamin is like an Odin type figure. He's like a priest, and Benjamin is basically the son of a priest, or this young like intern to a priest. And like Telemachus is the son of a priest. He's the son of Odysseus or son of Odin or something. There are theories, though, that Hymen means hymn. So he's like a hymn or a song a priest would sing. And thus Benjamin is like the son of a hymn. He's like the younger hymn, a chorus. And the chorus we can associate, or I associate with Telemachus or the Apollonian, right? In general, though, in Spanish, Benjamin means youngest son. So it could be just a young priest or a young scribe, someone wishing to learn the ways. Moreover, we can think of Odysseus and Telemachus along with Joseph and Benjamin in terms of the Spanish culture, right? The bullfight, the matador with his multicolored tunic, the red or scarlet cloth. Even today, we understand people in nice suits, like on the New York Stock Exchange, right? They're the bulls of the stock market, right? The bull is a symbol of the stock market. Likewise, the green and the red, right? The Glaucus and the Chalkos also have a lot of meaning too in the stock market. Likewise, the flamenco of the Spanish dance and other cultures have all this kind of symbology too. Features the guitarist, right, with his tortoiseshell, and a woman with a scarlet dress or something that dances around him. As the guitarist, sometimes he's on a chair. And even in an American-style rodeo, the bull are distracted by the bright-colored clowns, right, with the polka dot clothing. Another example of this, I guess, would be Little Red Riding Hood and the wolf, right, with the wolf being Telemachus or Benjamin. Here, so I'll read from the Odyssey. So he spoke, and Telemachus passed out through the farmstead with rapid strides, and was sowing the seeds of evil for the wooers. But when he came to the stately house, he set his spear in place, leaning it against a tall pillar, and him himself went in and crossed the threshold of stone. Him, the nurse Euryclea was the first to see, and as she was spreading fleeces on the richly wrought chairs. So Telemachus places the spear on the wall, and he climbs over the stone threshold. And we can assume like the spear on the wall is helping him get over the wall, right? He's a thief. But like I said, the poem is dynamic. So the thief, right, he gets away with stealing the cattle, right? He's able to kind of become the Apollonian by going up, Telemachus. Or Apollo accepts the tortoise shell as restitution. The copper becomes part of the silver in an alloy. It's accepted as this new regal standard, or the legal tender, this Apollonian or polished silver. There's an upsetting in the order of hierarchy. So you can think, what can be done can also be undone, right? And vice versa. Taking it further, we could say that Joshua and even Jesus, or the testament of Jesus, right? Because Odysseus kind of talks about what he did. He doesn't really do much of it, or you get it from the perspective of him telling King Alcinous that these testaments are kind of like this pirated version of the sun of, or at least some aspects of it, right? That these cults kind of try to replicate parts of the Apollo or the sun cult, right? And this one aspect would be in charge of the money, right? This courtly or justice-like figure who rules over these disputes. And they're thieves, right? They've cloaked themselves as an alloy, or maybe they're even like clippings of this silver. Telemachus is the testament of Odysseus, who is like what he says is like Jesus, but perhaps he's more like a Paul-like character, that he goes and talks about what Jesus did. And Telemachus is more like Matthew, or someone else who was kind of there or heard about it secondhand, right? And Jesus contains some of the attributes of the Apollonian, right? He's the favored son of God. He's associated with light and truth, but I mean, that's kind of where it ends, right? He's ultimately, or like Christian or Jewish cults are ultimately more like the Dionysian, right? Like Jesus is more like Dionysus, which is kind of created to compete with the royal sun gods of the Bronze Age. You can imagine like Hermes and other gods too, like Hephaestus, and the Athenian cults kind of come into interact, right? And they come into conflict or friction with the Apollonian cult, this royal seal, or like justice god of the royal family. Telemachus, as an alloy of copper and silver, contains the strength of the copper. The tortoise shell is strong enough to hold the tension, and Hermes is strong enough to string it, right? And likewise, Odysseus is said to be strong enough to be able to string the bows, unlike the suitors at the end of the Odyssey. Homer says in the Odyssey that Odysseus has mighty arms. In addition, Telemachus also has the regal and polished side of silver, where he's looking to pass as this Apollonian. He's searching for legitimacy, or during the Odyssey, he's always kind of unsure of his own legitimacy. He doesn't have to necessarily hide himself in rags or become this tarnished figure or tarnished silver. He's trying to polish himself, right? He's trying to become more legitimate, and he's looking for the courage and the confidence, and he finds that through the help of Athena. She gives him the courage and mind to act confidently. But he's kind of like this full silver new ally, right? Or maybe he's like an early attempt at making this near pure silver alloy. But he is princely, right? He has a legitimate claim. Telemachus has silver, or enough silver in him to be a legal tender, as to pass as one, right? Odysseus and Hermes, I would say, represent the raw form of a copper ore, or kind of that matrix or something, that ore that contains all the elements, or the metals that you wish to extract from it, right? And most of it is going to be like copper or lead, but there's going to be gold and silver in it, right? And it contains the tarnished or oxidized silver, in addition to the other kind of tarnished or oxidized, colorful copper forms, like the blue-green glaucos, right, and the reddish chalkos of copper. In the Homeric hymn to Hermes, Apollo goes through the flowery meadows and the greenery, and then there's like these sweet-smelling odors until he finds Hermes in a cave in the ground, and along with him he finds gold, silver, and he also finds the chalkos, or the chalon, the chalon, the tortoise shell, and there's colors of red and green, and we can interpret this as, again, the multicolored look of copper containing ores. And relating to the Bible, Joseph is said to have this multicolored robe, or his father gave him a multicolored robe. So Joseph's multicolored robe is like the flowery meadow, or this copper ore, this matrix of elemental or metals or minerals that you're going to extract out, or they're woven into the rock, right? This matrix or this like fabric. And Apollo is the one who comes across this, right? When he's looking for Hermes, he sees Hermes is like in this raw or tarnished or oxidized state in the ground. He's covered himself in the ground, or he's went into the cave. In addition, there's a word that is used in both the Iliad and Odyssey. It's said pokilos, which means multicolored embroidery or fabric, like a fabric on a chair, or multicolored fabric on a chariot. So, for example, from the Odyssey in Book 1, here I'll read. So saying, he is Telemachus, led the way, and Pallas Athena followed. When they were within the lofty house, he bore the spear and set it against a tall pillar in a polished spear rack, where were set many spears beside, even those of Odysseus of the steadfast heart. Athena herself led and seated on a chair, spreading a linen cloth beneath, a beautiful chair, richly wrought, and below was a footstool for the feet. Beside it he placed for himself an inlaid seat, apart from the others, the wooers, lest the stranger, vexed by their din, should loathe the meal, seeing that he was in the company of overweening men, and also that he might ask him about his father that was gone. And here, I'll read, in that passage, I'll read an interesting part again. So, Athena herself, he led, or he is Telemachus, and seated on a chair, spreading a linen cloth beneath, a beautiful chair, richly wrought, and below was a footstool for the feet. Beside it he placed for himself an inlaid seat, apart from the others. So again, it's apart from the others, and then it's this, in Greek, it's pokilos, the multicolored embroidery, or finely wrought, this chair with a linen cloth beneath it, and Athena lays it out for him, right? And it's the multicolor signifying the copper ore, but I think it also signifies that Telemachus is the son of Odysseus. He's like the son of a chair board member, or like a company, or like a new chair member. He's kind of like, right? He's not. He's kind of like a prince, but he's also somewhat unsure than that. He's young and he's incompetent, but he's not royal, but he still himself is royal. He's allowed to kind of sway people or get gifts from royal people. And the suitors don't find him legitimate, though, and he's kind of too weak to kick them out because he's young. So he's worried about drawing too much attention to himself. And then the more polished he gets in the book, right, because this is from Book 1, this passage, the more confident he gets in telling off the suitors. And like the chairperson or the chair position, like a CEO, we can also see, again, that like status or that position could become more powerful than like a statesman. And going further, the chair specifically, we can relate to the constellation Cassiopeia, who is now, we can now imagine her as this like woman on a chair, but in older archaic myths she was understood as this hand. And and I argue we see both of those kind of symbolic elements in the Odyssey, that Athena's like this guiding hand, she's the courage, but she's also, there's many women who like they sit on a chair, right, or they lay this skin or a linen cloth or something like that on a chair, right, for either Odysseus or Telemachus. But before we go further on that, first I want to get back to the multicolored theme of copper ores and how it relates to both Homer and the Bible. Another way Homer uses the word pokilos is with the word chariot, so it's pokilos armatas, or chariots with multicolored embroidery. And the multicolored fabrics and chariots are both associated with, like Gordon Gekko says in Wall Street, right? It's like being a player. It's being liquid. It's rich enough not to waste your time. It's to have a jet, a limo, a boat, or in the Bronze Age, a chariot. And I can think of it as kind of like the pipe dream of making it big in capitalism, right? The Apollo buys into trading the like his responsibilities as the shepherd, this enclosure, and he's set out to wander, right? And it's the pan flute. It's this pipe dream that Hermes makes for him. It's the multicolored chariots and the seats that Telemachus sits on, right? The board members and the CEOs, or even that he placed the lyre, this like rock guitar, or like a musician. These are what the Apollonian has kind of been set to wander or aspire to be. And these elements have been commodified, right? They've been put on the market, or things that you can buy that you associate with making it as like these kind of, whatever, a musician or in the stock market, right? You can literally buy this kind of things that associate with it. And Odysseus, furthermore, is said to wear these doubles or triple layered multicolored tunics. So it's like just having a good fashion sense, or being able to buy suits, being able to get around quickly, having cars and planes and money. That's what the Apollonian kind of has had to dream of, right? That he's lost his royal position as this judge. He's sold it to Hermes, his shepherd. He's lost his shepherd, right? This money, and then he's kind of had to dream of ways. Yeah, so it's the fashion, the wearing nice suits, the cars, the planes, the money. That's what the Apollonian has been set out of the enclosure to dream of. And likewise, that's what kind of drives the Mercurial to reach up, right? Make a deal with Apollo. That the Apollonian becomes intoxicated with becoming like the best, or making it in the market, right? But these are like pipe dreams, like I said. The Mercurial has kind of commodified the dreams and created a market for it. And we like, it's not like you you want to rise up and become like, like some great warrior king or something, right? You're not going to want to be Napoleon. You want to be like a rock star, or you want to make it in the stock market or something, like this Gordon Gekko. The lyre itself can be thought of as currency. The Italians had the lira, the constellation of the lyre. Think of the lyre like the scales of Libra that so Shamash used to be associated with the scales, and the scales are somewhat similar to a lyre. They contain the same thing. They contain strings and metal. They've just been kind of contorted, or you can say they've been exchanged, right? There's been this kind of like transformation of the value scales, or this complete you've kind of flipped it over the axis, right? What's right and what's left. The scales of Shamash, again, were traded in by Apollo for the bow or the lyre, and it's being stringed, and that deal is in exchange for the scale, or the balance of meaning and valuation. The English have the sterling silver and pound, which is abbreviated or symbolized by LB, or L for Libra, and again, that's the scale. But now we don't associate this scale with Apollo. It's the bow. He's the far shooter. He's kind of like this wandering, right? This wandering shot. And moving forward, another color theme or motif going on involves silver, where silver can be tarnished, and again, it can also be polished. And natural silver, or silver or ores containing silver, are black and sooty color because, well, once again, once silver or silver on the surface comes into contact with oxygen, it turns black, or it turns like a sooty color. So Hermes and Odysseus I see as the copper, or the earthly form of copper, silver, or maybe Hermes, like Odysseus and Odin, are alchemists. They can contain many different forms, right? They're these magicians that understand metallurgy, or at least some form of early chemistry of metals. Odysseus can also clean up, right? he can clean up pretty well. He goes from a dirty beggar in rags to being bathed and anointed and dressed in like these fresh clothes and like a prince or like a kingly palace, and he's like right next to the king, like before you know it, right? And he does this more than once. And perhaps you can understand this as like the metal making process, and they understood it in a sophisticated way as to extract silver from copper rich and lead rich ores. So like Odysseus is all covered in rags, and then he goes and takes a bath, right? And then he comes out looking good. Like the ores are going to contain many different materials. This could be like a matrix of materials. Like you could, but you are likely not going to just hit this vein of pure silver. You're most likely going to have to like get the silver from, once again, a lead or a copper ore. So like Telemachus is the finished product, where Odysseus or Odin is the ore itself, or it's the earthly form that can change shapes or change forms. He's the dirty beggar outside the wall, but he's also the clean, washed, anointed, and courtly form that could be traded just as currency inside the court, right? He's inside the walls too. Odin or Wodon is the way. It's the auto or the road or the car. Something like he is the way, right? The road itself is the way. It's the process, right? We can think of probably as like the technical know-how and process of metallurgy and the logistics of it. And Laertes maybe like the father of Odysseus is the cave itself. He houses the ore, the earthly ore, right? That Odysseus is this tarnished ore. And being able to separate silver from lead or silver from copper would be valuable knowledge, right? It can make you rich. And alloys allow one to make more coins or make more currency. It makes money more universal or accessible to others, and therefore more at risk for corruption, both by counterfeit but by merchants, or in general this ethnic network of merchants that can coordinate in an effort to swindle, steal, and create panic and confusion, ultimately to manipulate markets or wrestle them away from control of a autocratic state. So here I'll read now from the Sumerian poem Silver and Copper. Silver and Copper, lines 28 through 34. Strong copper answered silver. Silver, to make lead shine, is not an important achievement. Restitution, according to the tablets, does not do the work of copper. A hand without a wrist cannot work. A weak neck carries nothing, does not a thing to load. A heart, mankind, no one. A boat with bitumen in the river. And it's a little bit of fragmentary, but I think you get the gist. That, again, copper is stronger than silver, and that it's like the wrist or arm, as opposed to the hand, which is more dainty or princely or feminine. In that sense, we could think of the hand of God mentioned in Genesis 49, like the hand of Athena that guides Odysseus and Telemachus. It's the more princely form of them, and she allows them to get inside the castle, right? That she gives them this princely edge, this more feminine or princely way, this silver, right? The hand, or at least if you read it in the Greek, it's the word kairos or cheiros. Cheiros is like the chorus, I interpret. Like the chorus is how we understand like the choir or in a play or in church, right, at a sermon. They're kind of like the backup to the priest, but they also kind of lead the priest on in a sense that they give it confidence, right? They're like the backup to the priest. Without a chorus, it might not be as impactful. So like Athena or the chorus puts courage into the heart of Telemachus and guides him with her. The hand of Athena provides the chorus for Telemachus and Odysseus in the Odyssey, this testament of Odysseus, or the book of Joshua, as I would interpret it, as we know it today. So you could argue its meaning is almost the same as like a New Testament, but I would say it's more like the book of Joshua. But like everything, it just becomes more complex, right? So like after the book of Joshua, you get these myths that are like it, but they become more complex. That's why like the New Testament itself is like, you could say it's like Odysseus, but it's way more. There's way more testaments to it. Furthermore, we can think of the flamenco, or again in general the Spanish music with a guitar lead and there's a chorus, and a woman in red, she like claps her hands, right? And the hands itself could be thought of as like the hands of Athena, and it's like the chorus. While as the guitar is like the main singer, he's the priest. And the chorus backs up and gives measure to the verses, right? There's a verse, then there's a chorus, probably repeated like 2 or 3 times, and then there's another verse, etc. It can be measured, right? And you measure it through this dynamic of a chorus and a verse. And the implication is that the copper does all the work, and silver is like the hand. It's like refined, and it just kind of like sits there, and it's like a more nuanced approach. Likewise, you still need to be strong, though, to do work in the Bronze Age, right? Like the labor class, they might have it a little easier because there's bronze tools. But if you're still working with your hands, or you're still using your arms, you're going to be like jacked, right? You're going to have some huge arms if you're like a lumberjack or something, or like a farmer, which is probably how we get the handshake and an interview. It kind of, well, depending on how the handshake is, you can understand what type of person or what type of work they do. Moreover, let's read from Copper and Silver. So at segment D, lines 1 through 5, Copper speaks. The heavens were separated from the earth. There was no drinking water. In order that the people should eat food, my father Enlil created me in a single day, and then the Tigris charged like a great wild bull. My thinking is that the separation of salt and water, or the understanding of salt being dissolved, or better yet, separated from seawater or salt water, is what's going on here. So maybe they found some kind of solid salt deposits or crystals, right? And they licked it, or they found out it was salt. And then they dissolved it in water. And then they noticed that when they dissolved this salt in the water, it tastes like ocean water. And they connected it, right, that it's salt water. And then taking that logic, you can say that solids or solid salts can dissolve in water, right? And it's like you can have, and then likewise you can extract that solid from the liquid. And then you're kind of doing simple equations or simple chemistry equations, right? And I think this experiment with the rocks, and maybe this is how you get Hermes, right? I mean, Hermes literally means rock pile, but there's also like Hephaestus is the cult of metalworking. But you need both really to make metals, right? You need to have this kind of interfunctionality. Basically, you need to be able to mine rocks and have the logistics to get it to your blacksmith and be able to sell it at the market, right? There's no value itself in the metals. You got to give it value, and that value is given by the workers or the laborers, this Hephaestus, right? And you'll need to have metal tools, but you also need to control that labor. So essentially the cult of Hephaestus is this kind of like back and forth mechanism, or these functionalities. So the Roman Mercury, we can understand, is as literally as like a metals exchange, right? So it's money for labor, commodities, markets, just essentially power, and anything can really be brought or commodified and brought to the market. It's about the morality or the logistic, or not the legality of it, I think. And it's all about the legality, and thus, right, so Shamash, or the sun god, was the god who looked over legal matters or justice. So you can see how corrupting him or setting him out to wander is helpful in creating these new free markets, right? These Mercurial markets, these metals exchanges, where you can exchange the royal tender, and it's outside the enclosure of within the cult of Apollo. And copper is born from Enlil, a Saturn-like god or chief god, and he creates them in a single day, which is like the fast growth of Hermes, or just the speedy nature of Hermes in general. So like Odysseus in the Odyssey can change sizes, right? He gets big, and then Athena makes him small, and then she makes him old, and she makes him young. And in general, the story of the Odyssey is kind of all over the place, right? And you're literally transported far and wide. And it's unlike the stationary Iliad. You're like Hermes in that you're going all over the place. You get old, you get young, right? You're like Odysseus, and you're like Telemachus. It's all over the place. It's not really like this linear time. You're able to kind of go to different realms. Like Hermes can go to the underworld, he can go to Mount Olympus, and then he can interact with mortals. He's able to kind of go to all these different kind of realities or realms of reality. Likewise, we see Benjamin associated with the silver cup, and it's Benjamin who trails Joseph like Telemachus with regards to Odysseus before each reunite with the patriarch of the families, like Jacob and Laertes. So Telemachus and Benjamin, right? We can think of them as these wolves. There's these trailing, these far workers, right? They're like Apollo, the far worker. They're far off. Similarly, Apollo and Hermes meet before going to Olympus to confront Zeus in the Homeric hymn to Hermes. And in the Sumerian poem, Copper and Silver, they fight before going to seek counsel from Enlil, the chief god and patriarch of them, right? The characters, places, and objects in the poems can be thought of also as celestial movements in the sky, with the chariot of Auriga like the chariot of Telemachus or Joseph, this wandering and speedy motion of Mercury's as well. In combining this with the uniform appearance of the sun's orbit, you can signify moments in time or in the calendar pretty predictably, right? You can start to make calendars and understand the seasons and start to make these kind of delineations between these different kind of spaces and time, right? This how we understand a season. And in general, you want to know this for traveling, right? If you're a merchant, you want to know when's the best time to travel, but also like when it comes to the metals, right? It doesn't really matter Well, I guess it could. Like if it would, you would probably want some metals to be. Well, I don't know. I'm not. I'm not like in these markets, but like it would probably have something to do with the seasonality. Is if you're going to be buying grain, or if the price of silver, or and if silver is not independent of copper, then they're both going to be dependent on this grain. And grain is seasonal, right? I mean, depending on the flooding of the Nile or of the Euphrates or something, or and that itself they understood as not like dependent on the celestial movements, right? They track the time through the sky. So you understand how, like, if you're a merchant, you kind of had to understand you had to understand the movement of the sky and the constellations in regards to these different types of times and how they relate to prices and all this kind of stuff in the market, right? It's a way of understanding the market. Whereas today we just look at a chart, right? We just like chart everything with like candlesticks as opposed to like the days on the calendar, or you could chart it through days or weeks or months, right? Furthermore, and silver and copper, lines 6 through 11. At that time your feet did not move, and you did not walk around, and the of Enlil not separated from the ... You got up and you moved your feet towards his house. They cut you to pieces with the strength provided by me. Someone opens there with the abundance I give to the population. So copper is stronger than silver physically in that it allows you kind of this better minting through either a bronze press or machining, or it could be that it allows you to make alloys of silver, and you can kind of stretch out your silver, right? And copper, in a sense, allows for more currency to be made, right? It allows more people to enter the market. It allows for counterfeit or maybe even just a new legit royal tender, right? You can make these alloys. So thus giving more power to people, at least to the merchant classes or those who deal with money in the market. And they control the market, not this kind of like the little players. You want to be the big player. And they're independent somewhat of the government. That's what copper is, right? It's not silver. But it's at the same time can be equated or exchanged in this kind of rate or market. Hermes is that god, or he's that medium, he's that interface, he is that market. How it happens, how it gets carded or brought from the mine to the smith and to the market, that's kind of part of the god and all his attributes, right? So Hermes is associated with lots or dividing a whole up. And he's also he's also associated with luck. So it's like the stock market, right? Like you divide up a currency, you make more currency, you make more stock. You issue more stock, you make a company go public, right? It's not controlled by this private family or private company. It's now part of the public. And thus you say, oh, it becomes more democratized. But in reality, it can be controlled through only a small group of people, right? It's kind of like it's a show, right? It's a way to get into private entities or enclosures and open it up and set out the sheep to wander so you can steal them, right? And silver, or at least the idea of Apollonian and polished silver, is more than just a currency, right? In that it imparts a seal, a royal branding, right? When you make a coin, you stamp it, you give it a seal, and then depending on what the seal is or the god, right, it imparts some meaning in that symbol. Or in the most practical sense, it's a coupon for a set amount of grain, right? It's like a little token and you get grain, right, in the Bronze Age. The royal seal of the sun god carried a value or sense of legitimacy in that the sun god, Shamash, or any analogous sun god in like the Bronze Age, is always watching, so you have to kind of beware, right? But it's also a gesture or a symbol of goodwill, and that you're going to be protected, right, by this set currency, and that you're not going to get ripped off. And pure silver itself becomes more of a store of wealth, right, than just a coin, though. And think of a nest egg or a 401k, right, that these are stored in more secure assets. Likewise, silver was stored in chests, and the ancients, they wanted the money to be legitimate, but also those with wealth wanted like this safe keep, right? So then you would build these huge walls and bury your silver in these large chests underground. And it's funny because like the ore, you go through all this trouble to dig up the ore and you process it, and then like the pure stuff, you just end up hiding it underground, and then you kind of like make this mixed this alloy to kind of pass around as these shekels or these shells, these tortoise shells for the market. This kind of medium between you and the lower classes. Odysseus, after he kills all the suitors, he cleanses his house with this brimstone or this sooty-like material to cleanse or purify it. So he basically has created the cave or the hole in the ground for the silver he's stolen from people, and he returns the silver to the earthly or oxidized or tarnished form, right? Odysseus is the earthly form. He's the ore. He can become like this prince or this king or this like polished material, but in reality he always returns to that tarnished form, right? He's this kind of he's like a trickster, right? He's never going to reveal his true form all the time, that he can be polished, right? He needs to be brought up from the ground, and the dirt needs to be washed away from him in a warm bath. Reading further from Silver and Copper, lines 18 through 23. Men caulk tiny, very strong boxes for you, as they do a boat. They cover you over with their oldest rags, and someone digs a hole for you in the middle of the cattle pen, or they pour clay on top of you, as on a jar, with a sealed mouth, and then in the darkest place inside the house, someone buries you in the most obscure corner of a grave. When Odysseus arrives in Scheria, he appealed first to Arete for reception and protection, and she treated him hospitably. There's a passage in Book 8 of the Odyssey where Odysseus he's going to take a bath after being taken in by the Phaeacians. So the Phaeacians, I argue, are like the Phoenicians, or maybe it's like Jerusalem. As in Book 5 of the Odyssey, Odysseus leaves Calypso's island and he's heading for home, but then he washes up on the coast of the Scheria, or the land of the Phaeacians. And then he's like hanging on the vines and thorns. He's all intertwined in it, and he's in the bushes naked. He's like, I think like Odin is like hanging. Doesn't he like hang on something? I don't really know much about the Norse myths, but Jesus, he's like Jesus, right? He's like hanging up on there. It's like Odysseus is always like getting hung up or strung up on like these like crosses or something, right? He's kind of like Jesus, but he's talking about it, right? Like when he talks about that part, he's explaining what happened to him, and he ends up being taken in by the daughter of King Alcinous, and then eventually the housemaid and wife Alcinous helps the poor ragged Odysseus, right? And so I'll read here from Book 19. So he's about to take a shower. He's been taken in by the daughter of King Alcinous, and then the housemaid or the eventual wife gives him Arete gives him treasure. Then the fire played about the belly of the cauldron, and the water grew warm. But meanwhile Arete brought forth the stranger a beautiful chest from the treasure chamber, and placed in it the goodly gifts, the raiment and the gold which the Phaeacians gave, and therein she herself placed a cloak and a fair tunic, and she spoke and addressed Odysseus with winged words. Arete places a cloak and a fair tunic, or it's like the pokilos, or the multicolored tunic, this polka dot maybe, and which we can assume as it's like this wizard cloak, right? When we associate with wizards, it's like something out of Fantasia where they see like they wear like these bluish or these speckled or polka dot type robes, or more specifically, like in Fantasia, it's like the sky, right? It's like the night sky, these constellations. They have these like patterns of the constellations. Then Odysseus himself again is the tarnished or earthly form of the metal, the ore that is processed like in this cauldron or this bath or this wash, and then he's anointed after, and then he's clothed, or perhaps they have made a statue out of him, or the copper, or like they've processed him, right? They're making a coin out of him. Maybe that's what it means that he's kind of put on these tunics, and that they've kind of have this archaic contraption of like again, like the way, or Odin is the technical know-how how to make metals. Look, so let's read further. Look now thyself to the lid, and quickly cast a port upon it, lest someone despoil thee of thy gods on the way, when later on thou art lying in sweet sleep, as thou farest in the black ship. Now when the much enduring goodly Odysseus heard these words, he straightway fitted on the lid, and quickly cast a cord upon it, a cunning knot which queenly Circe once had taught him. Then forthwith the housewife bade him go to the bath and bathe, and his heart was glad when he saw the warm bath, for he had not been home to have such attendance from the time that he had left the house of fair-haired Calypso. But until then he had attendance continually as a god. When the handmaids had bathed him and anointed him with oil, and had cast about him a fair cloak and tunic, he came forth from the bath and went to join the men at their wine. So he has a bag of gifts, and there's like a cord tied around it. And I kind of associate this with Santa. maybe I'm still kind of like a kid that he's tied this bag of gifts at the top, and like again, we can understand Odysseus probably is like this commodification of the gods, or this to believe in Santa is one of our last pieces of innocence, and after that there are no more gods, right? Like maybe there's the tooth fairy or something, but Odysseus, again, we can think of the technique or processing of new alloys, or he's literally like a minting machine, right? It's like a shekel machine, the tortoiseshell guitar, and I think it's obviously it's going to be a scam, right? The little guys don't make money on the market. The little guys aren't like have this money printer that goes burr, right? I'd argue he's talking. You could also argue that he's talking about like the bagpipes, this musical instrument, because Odysseus, he gets a bag of wind from Aeolus, the god of wind, and then when he's about to get to Ithaca, his men open it up, right, this bag of wind, and then they're scattered, and they have to go by the sirens and the Scylla, the monsters, and then the cliffs or mountains are described as like these hollowed out. And if you read the Greek, it's like these hollowed out like a pipe or something. And then the sirens are like the sound. So you can imagine there's like this bag of wind, and then there's just sound, and then there's these like hollowed out pipes, right? It's like a bagpipe. And the pipe or pan flute was one of the things that Apollo is said to receive from Hermes, right? He gets the lyre, but he also gets the pan flute or the pipe. And perhaps the pipe is the bagpipe, or something like an accordion, or now we know organs at a church sermon. So let's read from Book 19 of the Odyssey. A fleecy cloak of purple did goodly Odysseus wear, a cloak of double fold, but the brooch upon it was fashioned of gold with double clasp, and on the front it was curiously wrought. A hound held in his forepaws a dappled fawn, and pinned it in his jaws as it writhed. And at this all men marveled how, though they were of gold, the hound was pining the fawn and strangling it, and the fawn was writhing with its feet and striving to flee. And I noted the tunic about its body all shining as is the sheen upon the skin of a dried onion. So soft was it, and glistened like the sun. Verily many women gazed at him in a wonder. And another thing will I thee, and do thou lay it to heart. I know not whether Odysseus was thus clothed at home, or whether one of his comrades gave him the raiment when he went on board the swift ship, or haply even some strangers, since to many men was Odysseus dear, for few of the Achaeans were his peers. And then reading in Greek, I think it becomes a little clearer. Cloak is Shlane or Shalane, which again is like this turtle shell. So the cloak is like the turtle shell. And furthermore, the brooch that is pinned on Odysseus is this purple fleecy cloak. And in Greek, there's a word used. It's called olos, which is like a tube or to play the flute. So again, hence this is why I say it's like a bagpipe, because he's like, it's like this fleecy cloak, and then it's got a tube or a pipe to play the flute on it. And in addition, there's the pokilos. It's the pokilos is the dappled fawn, right? That's getting eaten, or that's in the mouth of the dog of the brooch. And the pokilos used in the passage, again, it's like the multicolored, but I also think it could be like the Scottish tartan, right? It's the pattern on the kilt. It's the tribal pattern that's stitched on, right? And it could be like tartan. Maybe tartan we get tarnished, right? We get this tarnished, but I'm not quite sure that I'm not 100% on that. But I'm thinking what's going on here is that this is essentially like a bagpipe, and then these like different arraignments or coloring schemes are like the different tartan patterns of tribesmen, or like these tribal Scots, right? Or just in general different family groupings. and then moving along. So because Odysseus doesn't necessarily go through what he says, it's all recounted except for what, like his trip from Calypso's island to the Phaeacians and then home to Ithaca, you could say happens like in real time. But even that, you could say, they could be like recountings, right? But most of it is a testament. And then like the Iliad, right? The Iliad, we can say, is not a testament. It's almost like real life, right? The people there were real life, or they were living in real time. Whereas the Odyssey is all over the place. So again, silver is a store of wealth. It's your nest egg. And then there's going to be robbers and thieves like Copper, Hermes, Odysseus, Joseph, Joshua that want to steal it. And the jar with the seal on it, so these jars, it's like the royal marking, right? It's the currency of the royal house. And it could be this, that the Copper wants to steal it and they want to make this new currency, right? They want to make the alloy which allows you access without violence, right? It allows you to go over the walls as this vine, right? And get access to this bank vault, these like hidden treasure chest of silver. And silver doesn't really have value besides the grain or cattle it buys, like the security it provides. If you can hide it well enough behind like high walls, yeah, sure, others won't attack you, but they're gonna find other ways to kind of steal it, right? They want to find these people want to find their lucky charms, but in reality, silver it doesn't have much practical value, and that's kind of what's said in the poem. It has kind of these physical and chemical properties that we know of now, but even so, it's not like to justify the price it has as like, or what it used to probably as a currency, right? And as a currency, it was just a belief. Where at least copper is backed up by spears and tools and other kind of practical things. Almost like if you didn't care to believe in silver or even money, it would just go away. But we don't really determine the value or belief in money. It's the people who print it out or who create it. It's the people behind the huge walls, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's the people who are like on the chair seats, right? The wanderers, the merchants, the vines who grow over the walls. While the king or the government, this seal, is like the blame, the face of blame, or it's what you steal from, right? Or it's like you put you almost make it like a libertarian, right? Like Odysseus Odysseus could be like a libertarian, right? He like blames the government is going to end up getting the blame, right? You're going to be justified. You're going to be the hero for getting control of the resources, right? And not the and then on top of that, you're going to be thinking about as like you're part of the people, right? Like the stock market should be cheered on, or at least libertarians understand it as this democratization of the market, when in reality it turns into like an oligarchy. You could say that the government, that the people own less now than they would if they were just like in a socialist government where there was no market. When Odysseus leaves the Phaeacians, basically he's still stealing the silver. But I wouldn't consider myself a libertarian, but you need money, right? I mean, I would rather just have a dollar, but you don't want to have this corrupt dollar, right? Like it's gotta, some sense, just be a coupon for some kind of value or some kind of material, but it doesn't have to. We don't have to have all the speculation, right? We'd have a little more nuance, because right now it's the copper has more nuance than the silver, right? The silver has been set out to wander. It's not enclosed and focusing on ways to keep itself like, in charge or on top. When Odysseus leaves the Phaeacians, basically he's stealing the silver, and we can also think in terms of like the markets, right? So marketing, the royal seal, it can't hold up to the workings of copper market economies, where the corporations of labor and capital can become more powerful. They're more nimble, perceptive than the royals. So reading further from Silver and Copper, lines 24 through 37. When the time of wet ground has arrived for me, you do not supply the copper holes. You do not supply the copper hoes that chop weeds, so no one concerns themselves with you. When sowing time has arrived for me, you do not supply the copper adze that make plows, so no one concerns themselves with you. When winter time has arrived for me, you do not supply the copper axes that chop firewood, so no one concerns themselves with you. When harvest time has arrived for me, you do not supply the copper sickles that reap grain, so no one concerns himself with you. For your harvest or winter, you do not supply the copper adzes and chisels which build houses, not even a female lamb. So no one concerns themselves with you. So copper here is browsing, right? He browses up the labor, right, through the control of their materials for work. So copper is the tools, or what the tools are made out of. And through control of this price of everyday supplies, from gasoline to paper clips, it affects the wages of the labor. And believe it or not, this can coincide with celestial events or times during the year, right? These they're tracked by movements in the sky, right? Even today, with some goods and commodities, they're still seasonal. But most businesses are impacted by like the 4-year and 8-year political cycles. But in ancient times, the real meaning of these narratives was to be able to time the flooding of the Nile, the Euphrates, better, right, than probably the royal cults or the Apollo cults. Basically, you want to be able to coordinate or be able to buy in times when buy low, sell high. But you got to understand, well, why is it going to be low? Well, why is it going to be low? Because there's too much supply, right? So you got to know when to get in. When there's going to be a supply, it's going to be high, and there's these harvest times, and then if you control copper, then you can control like labor shortages or labor strikes, right? And there's a lot you can do, but I think that's what's going on here. Just pick a big rabble ruse, right? Copper is like the rabble ruser. Lines 50 through to 59. Silver answered strong copper. You do not give blades to the wooden hoe that breaks the ground. The wooden tool mixes the clay. Wedges are not written by you. The wooden shovels pile up the sheaves. Match your measuring devices to the measuring stick. Just approach the cargo boat that the canal banks. Just keep knocking on the great door of the house. At night, the stonecutter wrestles with stones and with beads. They are too hard, and he has to stop because of you. Work away with your tines at the dirt by the oven instead. So wood also undercuts and competes with copper, and likewise, it's the boat of wood that transports the copper. So there's more than 2 levers to fool around with here in this kind of mercantile exchange of the Bronze Age, and shortages to start or stop and shortages and like strikes to stop, the labor market or affect the price of labor and capital. It's like rock, paper, scissors, essentially a triplet where certain pairs dominate others, like in the futures or currency exchange markets today, right? You deal in pairs. In addition, copper is also paired with stones and beads, where stones and beads are considered the same, right? And that the stone cutters rely on copper tools that can go dull, and thus their efficiency is tied to the supply of copper, right? In addition, we can think of copper here as the limiting reagent, right? It's maybe not in the chemical sense, but in this process, this process that copper was like the supply needed to make other tools, right? And once copper ran out, or the copper supply was somehow, it was like shortened, or like you control the copper supply, therefore you could affect this stone cult, right? This market of stone. Also, Hermes is associated with rocks and pebbles or beads as well, right? With Hermes meaning rock pile, and he learned to divine, or basically he learned the art of mathematics and other sciences through the counting of pebbles, or that's how I understand it, because Apollo doesn't teach him, but he tells him where he can go to learn how to divine from pebbles or from rocks, right? So I think it's like an archaic form of mathematics. Reading more. You have accumulated lies about my honorable station. Let me, the mouse, do his work. His assigned task in the ground is noble. Your teeth dig the ground. Your tongue moves the dirt. The copper hoe has its digging taken over by the wooden hoe in the harder ground. The copper sickles need to have the hard weeds burned. The copper axes which chop trees, stripping and pulling out tamarisk, and ash shrubs have their blades dulled. The copper saws have to lie down for a rest besides the mountain trees. And I found this interesting because in the Odyssey there's a mention of stopping to rest beside the tree, and I think it could be like a place to meet someone before you head to the town. It's like a place to meet. It's a rendezvous spot, and it's before you enter the limits of the city, because once again, Odysseus is a thief. He's like Joseph. He's going to step over the walls of the city, and he's going to be using market economics, and he's going to be using the available resources, so like wood, copper, silver, rocks, these like Bronze Age exchange. And then going further, lines 67 through 84. When you keep hitting the soil like someone falling from a roof, when they carry you out from the big brambles and thorns like a dog with a as if they were catching a thief at midnight. When the great turbulent waters regularly yearly fill the desert, when they carry the grain from dry ground to the canal banks, when they carry the sesame from the furrows to the canal banks, when they carry to the red onions, white onions, edible bulbous leeks, and turnips flourishing in the furrows, when they transport the salt and spice seeds lying at the edges of the fields, when they feed the various grains to the cattle and sheep, when they bring to the pigs born at the fatteners, when they feed dough to the porcupine's litter, when they crush flour to the huge wild boar, straight-tailed fish, carp, fish with... it goes on and on. So, someone falling from a roof like a thief when they carry you out in thorns, and like a vine, I assume. So, remember that copper is like Joseph or Odysseus, and that they're thieves, and they're going to go try to steal the silver from the palace, and you can understand that as like this coordinating this vast trading network of supply and demand using the celestial calendar of constellations, planets, and moons, or and the moon and the sun, right? This network we can understand as as like a vine, or this family, these like sons, and this ethnic network, right? That they're going to take over, or scale over the wall, or they bring all these types of things to the market, right? And the market is where they make their money. And in order to make money, you got to understand how the seasons work, how time, in a sense, what is the essence of time? And the essence of time is us rotating around the sun, right? And in addition, there's other kind of, there's other entities or other kind of phenomena that go on, right? The moon itself will circle or orbit around us. So there's a lot of things to characterize or quantify time, and the best way, or the earliest kind of way to do that, was through the stars and the planets and constellations. And the people who understood that are kind of like developed these mathematics or reasoning of this scientific reasoning of, once again, math and time and the spatial aspect of it. They applied this to market economics, right? Or how to kind of take over this kind of more simpler feudal system. We may consider a more sinister meaning in esotericism behind the myth of copper and silver, though. And this is that of lead poisoning, or intentional lead poisoning. So in the book of Daniel, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, is said to go mad, eating grass like a sheep, speaking nonsense, and perhaps he's been poisoned by like this Odinesque or Mercurial figure, an alchemist who knew the dangerous and toxic effects of a certain forms of lead, right? And he's kind of used it to control or make the king himself kind of like impotent or sick. A white lead. So going further, so I search about this, and you read, it says, a white lead was written about in Greek and Roman times, but the mass of people probably did not know about the neurotoxic effects of lead. So the Greek poet and physician Nicandros of Colophon, who lived in around the 2nd century BC, wrote a poem which is included in his work, Alexipharmaca. In his poem, Nicandros describes in detail the effects of severe lead poisoning. Nicandros writes as translated in prose by A.S.F. Gow and A.F. Schofield. So, in second place, consider the hateful brew compounded with gleaming, deadly white lead, whose fresh color is like milk, which foams all over when you milk it, rich in the springtime, into the deep pails. Over the victim's jaws and in the grooves of the gums is plastered an astringent froth, and the furrow of the tongue turns rough on either side, and the depth of the throat grows somewhat dry, and from the pernicious venom flows a dry retching and hawking, for this affliction is severe. Meanwhile his spirit sickens, and he's worn out with mortal suffering. His body too grows chill, while sometimes his eyes behold strange illusions, or else he drowses, nor can he stir his limbs as heretofore, and he succumbs to the overwhelming fatigue. And then compare this to book 19 of the Odyssey. I already read this part, but I'll read it again. A fleecy cloak of purple did goodly Odysseus wear, a cloak of double fold, but the brooch upon it was a fashion of gold with double clasp, and on it, the front, it was curiously wrought. A hound held in his forepaws a dappled fawn, and pinned it in his jaws as it writhed, and at this all men marveled how, though they were of gold, the hound was pining the fawn, and was pinning the fawn and strangling it, and the fawn was writhing with its feet and striving to flee. And I noted the tunic about his body, all shining as the sheen upon the skin of a dried onion. So soft was it, and it glistened like the sun. Verily many women gazed at him in wonder. And another thing will I tell thee, and do thou lay it to the heart. I know not whether Odysseus was thus clothed at home, or whether one of his comrades gave him the raiment when he went on to board the swift ship, or haply even some stranger, since too many men was Odysseus dear, for the few of the Canes were his peer. And then now compare it to silver and copper, lines 38 through 51. Silver, you are forgotten in the soil inside the house, a scared mouse in a silent house. Silver, the palace is not your station, a obscured place, a grave, such is your station. Silver, banquets are not your assigned task. Fasting is your assigned task. Silver, to make lead shine is not an important achievement. The task of making divine statues is not likely to fall within your capabilities. Why do you keep attacking me like a dog, you snake? Get back in the darkest part of the house and lie down on your grave. Strong copper cast his legitimate insults against silver and was full of hate against them. Insults of a miserable dog, like water from a brackish well. He exerted his powers against him to harass him, and at this silver felt thoroughly harassed and did not befit his dignity. And then you can go even further and say that silver and copper had some medicinal benefits, where silver is a natural antimicrobial, and the ancient Romans had some of the best surgeons, and they used silver tools and like needles. They probably realized that it had antimicrobial. They didn't understand it, but they used it because they thought it healed, or it had properties that didn't at least cause not that it healed it, but it didn't cause like further infection. So again, a mercurial person or a wizard, alchemist, could say they were using silver, but perhaps they're using lead or something, right? You could do some damage if you're if you know like lead's bad for people, and they might think like maybe silver is good for you, like in the Bronze Age. Maybe they didn't know they were drinking weird tonics. You could poison someone. So the main moral of silver and copper is that copper is the better metal, right? You use it to alloy with silver, and then you get a share in the market, and through that share or that leverage, you can become to control the market. It's a way to kind of take over countries without having to literally take over or smash down their walls. You can climb over the walls. It's a new strategy, right? It's this New Testament, this new money-making scam. The tortoiseshell, the Shelemachus, the shekel-making machine, is the guitar, right? It's this alloy. It's the coins that's rattling around in your pocket, right? It's not the silver or the more refined money or stores of money like the inheritance, right? Nobody is going to inherit anything anymore. That's what they say. You're not going to own anything, and you're going to like it, right? You're going to live in this kind of like copper world. But maybe the moral of the story is that it's better to try to get silver out of these kind of like high copper ores instead of the lead copper ores, because the lead is poisonous. It's bad for you.